Welcome to Dadsplaining, a weekly chronicle of all the weirdest, messiest, grossest, and funniest parts of fatherhood, hosted by two first-time dads. I'm Jesse.
And I'm Brandon.
And this week we are going to be talking about being at home with the kid. Whether you're working or taking time off work, there's a lot that you just don't know when you get home with a kid, and there's a lot that you expect that's going to happen that doesn't actually pan out, and things that happen that you had no way of expecting. So we're going to talk about all of it today. But first, Brandon, how can our listeners get in touch with us?
So if you like what you're listening to, you can follow us on all the major social media accounts. We have Facebook, Twitter, and now introducing Instagram. So check us out at Dadsplaining Podcast. Or if you want to go old school, you can check us out at dadsplainingpodcast@gmail.com and drop us a line.
Awesome. Hey, Brandon, how are things going this week with Noah?
Things are going pretty well. I would say that he's doing a really good job of adjusting to daycare. We're now on week 2 of that, so he's no longer crying when we drop him off. He seems happy when we pick him up. I have no idea what goes on in those intervening hours in the middle there. It's a black hole, so I just have to hope that he's having a good time, and I have to believe the teachers that are telling me he's having a good time, so that's nice.
Nice.
But we started to encounter the dreaded daycare sickness that everyone seems to go through as soon as you drop him off. It's a good and a bad. I would say it's not too bad because, yes, he's been a little bit sick, but it's really been quite mild. I know your son had like a cough for quite a while.
Yeah, he had the croup for, 3 weeks straight. And it started out pretty bad with fever and congestion and a pretty bad chest cough.
Yeah.
And after a while, the fever went away, and then it would come back, and then it would go away again. And then by the end of it, and he's actually still got a cough that has not 100% gone away yet. And he's been in daycare for about a month now.
Gotcha.
But it's one of those things, you go into it expecting that your kid's going to get sick, and that's the downside. But the upside to that is they're going to build an immune system from an early age.
Just got to wait for that to come around.
Yeah.
You're still waiting, and you're a month in. I'm like 2 weeks in, not even quite, almost done with that. And yeah, my son Noah is just starting to. He picked up what I think is like a mild cold, I guess. So he's had some of the congestion, some like trouble, breathing. It sounds very phlegmy or whatever. And that's mainly just been an impact on when he's trying to sleep. Because something you don't think about is, in order for a baby to be comfortable, they're generally doing some combination of a pacifier or sucking on a thumb or sucking on something, not all the time, but like definitely to get to sleep. There's that kind of self-soothing that has to happen.
Yeah.
And if he's sucking on his thumb, he's congested enough where he can't really breathe great out of his nose. So he can't get comfortable, and then that wakes him up. And he's not able to go to sleep or stay asleep for extended periods of time. So we've been dealing with that a little bit. But one of the things I want to mention to the listeners out there is be prepared and get something that we've been using called saline drops. Saline drops. And basically you might have used these maybe even, if you're an adult, like you kind of like spray a little bit of something up your nostrils to kind of loosen it up and kind of clear it out, and then it kind of just floods out. So those have been a godsend for us. Basically, anytime we hear him being congested, we just kind of do a little drop in each nose, and then it kind of clears him up for a couple of hours at a time.
How does he do with you putting an implement into his nose?
As if we're trying to kill him.
Hey, yeah.
So basically, anytime you come anywhere near his face, first of all, he starts out happy because he thinks you're going to feed him something. So this is a bottle with like a spray component on the end where you kind of like, it's a little nozzle and you kind of squeeze it. So it looks like you might be feeding him something.
Oh, no.
And so he goes really excited, gets the mouth, you can't see me, but trying to really open up that mouth wide to eat it. You got to get around that first. You got to block the mouth, and you got to go above that to the nose. Teensy little nose, by the way. I don't know if anyone's noticed, but babies are small. So the nose is very tiny, and you're trying to shove something that's not super small up the nose, hold it in position in the nostril, and squeeze it, all of which might take 2-3 seconds, but good luck getting your kid to stay still for that amount of time. It's taken both me and my wife to like physically restrain him, like arms and his head, because he'll just go left, right, left, right, left, right. So it's been fun. Football season is starting for everyone at this time. Now we're recording in the beginning of September, but like this is what I'm doing right now is I'm tackling and blocking my son to try to keep him from getting the nose drops in his mouth.
It's the same deal with David. You put him down and you get the spray, the nozzle of it up to his nose, and we also do the nose Frida, which is where you have one end in his nose and one end in your mouth, and you're using suction to
sounds disgusting,
to
but
the
it's like
Yeah, I've tried it. Really, it's not as gross as it sounds. The worst part is the child thinking that they're actually going to die.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean, they are really screaming bloody murder, literally at that point, and it's insane. So I totally feel your pain, dude, and I'm sure most parents who have tried this do as well.
Yeah, and what never ceases to amaze me, and yet I never remember this in the moment of when I'm trying to apply some kind of medicine, is that babies have the shortest of short-term memory. So as soon as you're done, couple minutes, like, he'll just forget about it. He's moving on.
Exactly.
And that happens for everything. Like, I had another incident this week where I was taking off a onesie, and I've talked about this before on the podcast, but like the worst thing that can happen is you scrape those metal clasps across their head. And I was doing that, getting him ready for his bath, and I just noticed that there were like 3 red lines up his forehead. And I'm like, where'd those come from, honey? And my wife's like, from you just now taking his onesie off.
Oh my God.
Like, I'm a terrible dad. They're gonna come from my parenting card. They're gonna take my dad card and remove it.
One day your kid's gonna have like the Harry Potter-esque scar on his forehead, and
really
all the kids are gonna
seems
be like, "Oh, where did you get that interesting scar?"
It seems like Wolverine has slashed my son. Like, that's how bad it looks, and like, I'm the parent that loves him, and that's what I'm doing to him. I've had a rough week of it. Parenting-wise, dadding-wise, so don't think that we're perfect, because we're not.
Yeah.
You know, I've mentioned the onesie thing, but something else that happened is we were driving home from visiting my parents, and we're just about not even quite halfway home, and both my wife and I are like,
"Oh no,
what is that poop? Did he fart? Please be a fart. Please be a fart." But after driving for a few more minutes, we're like, no, we're definitely smelling something. And so you got to act now, because if it gets on the car seat, it's game over, and you do not want to pull apart a car seat. I've done it. Had to watch a YouTube video to figure out how to disassemble the car seat so I could wash and clean it. It's not fun. So we pull him out. He hasn't gotten poop everywhere, thankfully. We caught it early. And problem is, our car was fully loaded. So the trunk was fully loaded. That's normally where I would take him to change him, like in the middle of the road or whatever. Just pull over and change him in the trunk and like nice flat surface. So there's nowhere flat to put him down. So I'm trying to change him in the back seat, which you don't think about this when you're riding in a car, but they're kind of tilted.
Yep.
So it's not like a 90-degree angle. It's a little tilted, and so he's just kind of rolling slightly, flailing a little bit. He's kind of diagonal on the seat. There's not a whole lot of room because the car seat's getting in the way, and I'm changing him, and he just starts crying really loudly for no real reason. And normally he's comfortable with diaper changes. He's almost kind of happy about it. I mean, who wouldn't like getting their, like wiped down for them? Not bad. Way to live. But he just starts bawling. I'm like, what's going on? What's going on? And it's really bad, and like I can't even like kind of get through the diaper change. And my wife is like, I think it's you. And so like again, this is coming back to me like failing as a father. And what was happening is he was next to one of the belt buckles that the car seat was attached to, and as I was changing him, I was kind of bashing his head into the seat belt, and sure enough, there's like a tiny little, not a dent, right, but like an indentation with like a marking on my son's head. So I have just really brutalized my son this week.
Oh my God, it's don't feel bad. I mean, I remember when we took our road trip down to Florida, having to stop multiple times along the side of the highway and change David in the back seat. And it is not easy. It's
not at all.
It's really difficult. It is at an angle, so you're faced with the choice of either having him kind of tilted down or that diagonal turn, which is definitely not comfortable, or just completely horizontal, in which case he's going to barrel roll, which you don't want a child to do when there's a dirty diaper
with
nearby.
Poop around, you just like starts rolling around on the floor.
So you're in a no-win scenario. So really, you probably did the best you could do given the circumstances, and it's like you said, the attention span on these kids, it's like goldfish right now. I mean, 3 seconds later, he's back to 100%.
Yeah, I mean, he got over it, but I'm like scarred. You know, and he's the one with the scar. All right, so I've made fun of myself as much as I could possibly do in one given week. How has it been going for you, Jesse?
It's been going all right. Things have actually been incident-free this past week. Some things that have been happening is, I think I mentioned last week that David has learned to stand up in his crib, which is really nice, except when we're trying to get him to go to sleep at night. And of course, he doesn't want to go to sleep at night because there are things happening. So what he'll do is, even in his transition sleeper sack that we've got him in, he will pull himself up and stand at the edge of his crib. And what's worse is that I think I think he has figured out what our monitor camera is and what's on the other side of it.
Oh,
this kid is
wow.
smart. So
Yeah.
he will stand up on the edge of the crib and then cruise his way over to the side that's facing the camera and then look directly into the lens, into our souls, because we're watching on the other side, and scream and cry and make the saddest face. And it's been torture. And I had to learn just to let it happen. You guys, I know you worked the cry it out method to some success in the past few weeks. And, we didn't have to do that at first, because at first David was very good about falling asleep in his crib. But he had this sort of relapse, what's the word they go to? A regression?
Yeah, like a sleep regression.
A sleep regression in the past couple of weeks at the same time that he's learned to stand up. So it's made it that much more difficult. And I ordinarily would be okay with letting him cry it out, but I had this nagging fear in the back of my head that he's going to pull himself up and that he was going to somehow launch himself over the crib. And of course, I've lowered the crib to where it's too low for him to do that. He can't get over, it's at head level.
Right.
And I know logically that he's safe, but that doesn't stop that nagging fear. So my wife eventually had to be like, look, he's going to fall asleep. And, if he kind of falls because he doesn't really know how to get back down, he'll just kind of fall
Right,
down.
he doesn't know how to let himself down.
Yeah, and he may bump his head on the rail of the crib, and it's okay. It's not very hard. He'll be fine. And just let him do it. And I had to get over myself and just do that. And sure enough, he'll actually fall asleep standing up.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Kind of with his head resting on the rail of the crib. And then I'll creep in there and gently lay him down. And then he'll wake up and cry for a second.
Yeah.
And then he'll fall asleep and we'll have peace for the rest of the night. And the past few nights have been okay doing that.
Great. Yeah. No, that first time you try to do the cry it out, it's the worst. It's way harder on the parents, I believe. Because you're the ones that are like crying, it's tearing your soul apart. And, and especially if your kid's looking at you through the monitor being like, you could help me if you really loved me.
Oh, yeah.
But you don't love me because you can't.
It's hard.
Oh, my gosh. That's fantastic.
Yeah. The other thing that we've learned this past week is that we're old. My wife and I have noticed, and this is, of course, a consequence of sleep deprivation as young parents, that we can't stay awake through an entire movie anymore.
Oh, wow.
We started watching the original Blade Runner over the weekend, and it took us 3 nights to finish it because we would put the kid to bed, watch for half an hour. I would nod off. My wife would fall asleep. We'd wake up and be like, oh, well, we're not going to finish this tonight. Let's hit pause and come back the next night. So we did that, and then now we're watching the sequel that just came out last year with Ryan Gosling, and it's really good. Yeah. But again, we can get through maybe 30 minutes at a time before, it's not even 10 o'clock, and I'm asleep. I'm asleep on the couch. So, we have to kind of put pause on it, and that's something we've brought up on the podcast before, is that you just have to kind of expect that as young parents, different circumstances are going to get in the way of you enjoying things for the duration, the uninterrupted period that you used to enjoy them for. Things as simple as sitting through a meal to watching a movie. And it's different if you're able to, pass the kid off to childcare, or if you've got family, that you can have him hang out with while your wife and you go out on a date. But when you're doing things at home and the kid's around, you're either going to be too tired or too distracted. And it's sometimes hard to transition to, but you get used to it.
Yeah, for sure. And it's something that I'm actually looking forward to seeing how I handle in that same vein tonight. The Falcons are playing their first football game of the season. And, of course, it doesn't start until like 8 o'clock. I'm like, who does this to humans?
Hard.
What's wrong with this? So I'm already wondering, like, how far am I going to make it?
Yeah.
How far am I going to make it? My bedtime's like 10 o'clock. Am I going to make it to halftime?
Halftime, maybe?
Yeah.
We'll
Next
see.
week, I will report back on how long I made it through the game.
Okay, so let's move on to this week's topic. We're going to be talking about being at home with the kid. This is something that, Brandon, I know that you have been living through for the past several weeks.
Yep.
Being a stay-at-home dad, being on paid parental leave with your son, and that this is actually your last week of that. How has that been going?
Yeah, so really interested to talk about this topic because the way that I really have tried to reconcile on the back end is, what did I think I was going to get out of this, and what's it actually been like? And it's very different than I had anticipated. Some things have been great, of course, and we'll talk about that, but some things have been really surprising. And it sounds rough to say that there's been some negatives, but I mean, there's just the realities that we talk about on this podcast. Is
the challenges.
What you understand after you go through them as a parent. I mean, it's not all sunshine and roses. So I'll start a little bit with some of the expectations. Like I had an amazing opportunity through my work to take 4 months of paid time off. So something that not many people get to do.
Yeah.
Not rubbing it in anyone's faces. But it was a lot of time. And so going into it, I'm like, this is a ton of time on my hands. What am I going to do with all of this? I mean, sure, I'm watching my son, but naive me, first time parent, I'm like, I'm going to have tons of free time. Maybe I'll be able to go to the gym all the time. Maybe I'll get in shape all of a sudden, avoid that dad bod. Maybe I'll do some yard work, I'll really clean up around the house. It's going to look great all the time. So I had a lot of expectations of freedom, basically, because I'm like, I'm going to be at home with nothing to do, no commitments. It's going to be great. And then the opposite tends to happen. Yeah. So the reality is that I really accomplished a lot of nothing. And that's a hard one to come to grips with, because you would think that you need to be productive somehow, or at least me, like I like to be productive. And especially if I can relate it back to something that, maybe working parents can relate to is if you're like me, you want to be successful at your job, you want to accomplish things, and that's how you dictate success. That's how you feel it. So for me, even if I made it through a day and, like I'm alive, my son's alive, he's happy, like I'm just like, what did I do today? So that was something that was difficult to get used to, is that you're constantly busy without actually doing anything. Yeah. There's so much that goes into just taking care of your kid on a minute-to-minute basis. And even though I thought, there'll be plenty of breaks because he'll take naps and things, that was another thing that like really changed, is that I didn't appreciate how fast he develops. My son Noah develops, because I was gone for several months. I was on leave for several months. So in that time, he, evolved himself. Yeah. And he grew, and he went through different stages. They talk about the mental leaps that kids go through. Yep. We've talked about how, my son in particular went through the 4-month sleep regression. So he's getting less sleep. And then we're trying to figure out how to help him sleep better. So you have these expectations of like, I'll just take lots of naps. I'll be refreshed all the time because I can sleep in. And it's just not the way it happens. Now I'm on a, going to bed at 10 o'clock schedule, waking up at 7 a.m. And I also wake up in the middle of the night to feed my son. Right. So there's just like no consistent sleep. And then it's actually really hard to take naps during the day, even when you're tired. So that was another thing that I expected, is that I'd have a lot of relaxation time, and that's not really the case. Gotcha. And I think that the benefits are that you think you're going to get the hang of it, basically. Like, I was really worried, in the early weeks and days of, I don't know how to be a dad. I don't know how to parent. I don't know how to take care of a baby. I assume, Jesse, you had similar thoughts. Like, how do I baby? How do I take
how do I
care
dad?
of someone?
That was, and for the few weeks that I was home, of course, it was me and my wife, and we were having those same thoughts, the same questions, like, how do we do this? And, of course, you rely on the things that you learn, the things that your parents teach you, and that the professionals that you work with before having the baby, and of course all the books you read, and then a lot of it is just common sense, and you kind of figure it out as you go along. But it's so uncharted territory, because you step into it, and it's like starting a new job, and there's no on-the-job training, and it can be daunting.
Yeah, it was really daunting for sure, and I think that that's one of the positives, is that I definitely feel like I've got the hang of it. Like, I really got a lot of time with my son to learn him, basically. And the on-the-job training, there isn't any, but at least you get to learn on the job. Like, it's totally hands-on. Yeah. That's all there is to it. So even if you don't read up, I wasn't a great prepper or reader ahead of time. Me neither. But I feel like I learned it all as quickly as one possibly could, because there's really no other option. Yeah, exactly. Along the way. Yeah. So there was a lot of things to get over, like kind of these mental hurdles almost, where I expected a lot of myself. And it's been a little challenging to kind of feel like I had a successful period of having time off, because it's just one of the things that I've struggled with. As a parent, and maybe something that can relate to a lot of people who work, is the fulfillment aspect. Yeah. How do you feel fulfilled? Can you feel fully fulfilled just being a parent? And that's been one of the things that I've got to kind of experience is that I, spend so much time with my son, that should be perfectly fulfilling, but it's not even that I want to go back to work and I need to work to feel fulfilled, but it's very difficult work being at home with a kid all day.
Yeah.
And so first off, humongous shout out to the stay-at-home parents because, I've got a taste of it and it's very challenging.
Yeah.
So if you have a wife or a partner who does that, and if you leave them in the middle of the morning and then you come home at the end of the day and they're in the same spot, as long as the kid's alive, that is a huge win.
Yeah.
So it was really hard for me to come to grips with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it's because stereotypes or like I'm the man, the bringing home the bacon thing or whatever, and like I just couldn't adjust to that very easily. It was kind of hard to feel comfortable with that. But hopefully the perspective that I want to share is that it's just really difficult on a daily basis just to survive.
Oh, yeah.
So give all the props to the stay-at-home parents or the parents who are with their kids or someone who's working from home. I don't know how you can even accomplish that.
Yeah.
It's hard enough to not work, as I experienced, but it's a big challenge.
Oh, yeah. That's something that, of course, like I said, I had 3 weeks off when it was just me, my wife, and the baby. Of course, I was very rarely just me and the baby, which I know that you had several months of.
Yeah.
And, that can be very difficult. And then when I went back to work, I had a couple days. Originally, it was 3 days a week I would work from home, and then 2 days I would come in, and then it switched where I would work from home 2 days a week, and I would come in 3 days a week. So the biggest challenge I found was balancing my work life with my parenting life, because when you're at work in an office setting, of course, you've got your distractions, you've got the water cooler, and, your coworker stopping by your cubicle or your office to chat. But for the most part, you're in work mode and you're used to kind of working uninterrupted. That is never a reality at home when you've got a kid.
No.
The hard part for me was learning to work in interrupted blocks.
Mm-hmm.
You will maybe get half an hour's worth of work done, and then there's something you're going to have to check on. Or a bottle feeding, or a diaper change, or the kid is making some noise, or he's not happy in some way.
Yep.
So for me, it was a hard mental adjustment to figure that out. And one thing I found that helped was when I discovered that I could take my kid's bouncer and put it in the home office with me, where I was working from the computer, and that gave him something to entertain himself. Of course, this is when he's past the age where he's just a potato on the ground. Those first few weeks, first couple of months before he can really roll over or move anywhere, it's, I would say, maybe a little bit easier to get work done because you can lay out the play mat, the mobile of stuff that dangles overhead and kind of keep him occupied, and he's not going to go anywhere. And you can kind of keep an eye on him, look back and forth from the computer to the baby and back and forth and do that until it's time for a diaper change or a feeding. But once they get to the crawling age, it becomes a lot more difficult.
Oh, yeah.
So what I found was I would take his bouncer. Ours has sort of Finding Nemo toys all around it. So he can kind of spin around in a circle and bounce up and down, and there's lights and sounds and that kind of fun stuff. And that'll keep them occupied for a while. But again, every 30 minutes or so, or even less sometimes, you're going to have to pull them out and give them attention in some way. And you just got to make that mental transition from work mode, working uninterrupted, to working in segments. And then the other thing I found out was your 8-hour 9 to 5 may not be a 9 to 5 anymore.
Oh, yeah.
One thing I learned that helped me was get up before the baby gets up. Get some work done while the house is quiet before the baby's woken up for the day. Then spend time with the kid, and then put the baby down for his morning nap, and then get back to work. And then get on that grind, and then wake the baby up, play with him, noon nap, work, and then baby's put him to bed for the evening, get the work done. Your work day may be spread out in 2-hour chunks throughout the day. And that's something I kind of had to adjust to was, okay, I am getting the same amount of work done that I would at the office, but it's much more spread out. So I'm having to kind of adjust to that mentally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And it's a definite challenge to do it without a job, but having to do it with a job involves, I think, as you pointed out, Jesse, just a lot more forethought and planning. But what are some of the things that you kind of enjoyed about it? Okay,
so, I mean, obviously, being there with the kid is really, really cool, especially when they're that young. Because it's like you said, you get to watch them evolve. You know what I mean? From what I call potato, where they don't do anything and they
Yep.
just make noise and poop and eat, into something that can crawl and explore its surroundings and smile and laugh and, still poop and still cry, but there's all the fun stuff too. And then getting to kind of share with that kid. So I would plan my lunch breaks around feeding schedules, and I would just take off an hour or two. I would feed him lunch, and then we would hang out together and, I don't know, watch one of my favorite cartoons as a kid or something like that, and then put him in the playpen, hang out with him, and then I would go back to work, and I would carry him back upstairs with me. And, of course, it was not very frequent that it would just be me and him. Many days, my wife would be working remotely as well, so we would kind of juggle back and forth there.
Yeah.
But that one-on-one bonding time was really, really cool when it was just me and the baby. You learn really quickly how close you can be to something, to another living thing, when for that day, you're the only living thing that it's depending on, that you have to take care of all of its needs. That really, really tethers you emotionally to that kid, which is really, really cool. That was one of the benefits that I found. The other cool thing is that interrupted working schedule gives you a little bit more freedom. You don't feel like you have to start your day right at 9 o'clock, finish right at 5 o'clock. One fun thing that I enjoyed was, when it was me and my wife both working from home, I didn't have to get in my car at 6:30 to sit on the interstate for an hour and a half to get to work and then start my day.
Right.
I could actually go out and grab some coffee for us, grab some breakfast and then bring that back, and we'd have a little breakfast date in the living room, just the three of us, and then I'd get my day started. So really, it's hard. There's a lot of work, but there's also, you can kind of create a more relaxed pace to your day when you're doing that. That was just one of the things that I kind of figured out how to benefit, and kind of enjoy life a little bit more while I was doing that. So now every chance I get, you just have fun with it.
And I think that's really key. The kind of way I think about it is almost like creating moments that you can get a little bit more intimate with it, I suppose, if you want to say it like that, that more bonding focus. Because if you're home an entire day, every moment's not magical, every moment's not amazing, every moment's not just brimming with wonderful bonding. Because there's plenty of moments where it's like, okay, I need you to kind of go in the bouncer and hopefully be distracted for a little while, or I really hope you take a nap for an hour and not just 20 minutes. But yeah, having a moment where you can do something like what you talked about, Jesse, going to get some coffee, having a nice breakfast, and your kids maybe a little more docile in the morning, hopefully. For me, like occasionally getting out and going on a walk. It feels really nice to be able to go out and do things. I definitely agree with you. You have a thought of what the workday is, but then if you kind of have to work it around being a parent, you can maybe almost insert some of those moments. So even if your workday is longer, you have these moments during it where you're getting to have some fun. And like that family time. That's just something that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise, for sure.
Definitely. So all that is actually in line with an article that I've been reading this week from Buffer, which is a social media management platform. They took a poll of their employees, many of whom work remotely. How do you keep your sanity? What are some tips you would share with parents that are working from home with the kids? And the number one tip was enjoy the little moments. One of their employees said, for me, there are often times when my son wakes up and I hear him talking to himself and his toys. Those moments are priceless. And that actually, I had that moment this morning. I was getting ready for work. I usually leave by 6 a.m., which the downside to that is that's right before my son wakes up. So usually I don't get to see him in the mornings anymore, which is unfortunate. But the upside is I get to pick him up from daycare in the afternoons. But when I woke up, but when I was just about to leave, I heard him kind of doing his little breathing, which I can always tell when he wakes up. Before he starts crying for attention, he'll kind of, it's like he breathes in an excited kind of way. It's like, hey, I'm something cool's happening. I'm awake. Yay. The world is back. And of course I walk in there and he's standing up along the rail of his crib, but he's not upset. And I got to kind of spend a few extra minutes with him that morning, kind of getting him ready. So, you get to enjoy and savor those moments, which was really, really cool. Another tip they shared was communicate clearly. And they're talking specifically about if you're sharing those responsibilities with your partner, be clear on what you can do, what you can't do, what your schedule's like. One thing I really struggled with when I was working from home is I would often forget to tell my wife when I had an important conference call or something like that. Somewhere, some event where I could not have the kid in the room with me.
Mm-hmm.
And it would come right up on that. And then we'd have to figure something out, and then, she's like, okay, well, I'll take him. And then I'll have to give him back to you because then I've got a call immediately after that, So communicate clearly with whoever you're sharing the load with, if you have someone to share the load with ahead of time, so that it doesn't sneak up on you and, cause some big problems. One other employee said hire a babysitter part-time. I know that's not viable for everybody. That's actually something we considered at-home childcare, but it was hella expensive. So we just bypassed that. And of course, now we're paying out the nose for daycare, but it's
happily though, right?
Exactly,
because it's what you want to do.
Right. We're yeah.
I want to fork over that money.
Right. We're happy to do it.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that they suggested is the same thing I suggested, which is kind of just spread your work out a little bit. Don't put all the pressure on to just work uninterrupted. That's not going to happen. So just kind of be flexible with your schedule. And of course, there's a limit to that because you can't be obsessive about it. That's a problem that I had, was I'd be like, okay, I've got to hit exactly 8 hours, which means if I start at 9:15 and then I take a break at 11:15 until 12:15, I've got to get back on it. And that means I've got to work until 5:59 p.m. this evening. You got to learn to be a little bit flexible in those areas, or else you are going to rob the rest of your family of their sanity. Okay, utilize nap and sleep times. That's a big thing that I did, was I would plan my work around when my kid is in the crib taking a nap, which is especially true if you're trying to schedule a call with your coworkers or something like that.
Right.
Try and kind of figure out, okay, well, I know my son usually takes his nap around 12:15, so let's do our call at 12:30. Something like that. Some of these tips are for when your kids are older. Give them an activity that they can do independently that's kind of constructive and that will take a long time, like, go outside and do this thing in the backyard, or, here's a toy, play with that for half an hour, and then I'll give you a different toy to kind of rotate and keep things interesting. Of course, if you've got a newborn child, that's not going to do any good. But, there are things that you can do once the kid gets a little older.
That's funny because I tell my son all the time, who's 5 months old, like, hey, here's this toy. Please enjoy that for the next 30 minutes. And I'm giving him, like, the stare, like, you will enjoy this for 30 minutes, the Star Wars, like, Jedi mind trick. And then he's, like, bored with it after 2 seconds. He throws it back at me. Yeah.
And there's a lot more tips on here. There's a total of 21 really in-depth tips from all of their different employees. And I'm going to post a link in the show notes, but the biggest takeaway that I took was remember the bigger picture. And they say some days may be tougher than others. I strive to keep focused on the work tasks that matter most, so I'm getting those done in my available time, and hold to the bigger vision and benefits of being able to work from home because these memories are worth it. Yeah. And that's totally true.
Yeah, I think that's the takeaway for anything that has to do with spending time with your kid.
Totally.
It's 100% worth it.
Yeah.
And I hope that anyone gets an opportunity to do this, even for a short period of time. I think we've talked about it before, but if you have an opportunity to take some time off and be at home with your kids, do it, because you will get this same perspective. It'll be different than ours, but you'll get this same kind of perspective into what it's really like. It's really invaluable to be able to get the bonding and all the positives, but even some of the stuff that's a little more of a negative, you can't really appreciate it until you've done it.
Yeah.
So some of the things we talked about, we try to help impress upon you. Well, some of the things that we just happen to have learned, but we do also recognize that people have it harder than us. People are doing more of it. People are doing the work from home. So one of the things I'm curious to get your take on, Jesse, is you've had a little bit of a vibe of it, but do you think you could actually do it where you worked from home and were also like a stay-at-home parent at the same time?
Not if I was on my own.
Yeah.
I really don't think so. If I was a single parent, or if, for instance, if my wife worked full time in the office and was not at home at least some days to help out, It's the kind of thing where, like you said, like you got a dose of being at home full-time for an extended period without working. That's hard enough. Add a full-time 40-hour-a-week job on top of that, and you've got a recipe for something that is very much a challenge. And there are people that do it, and more power to them. But you got to appreciate that. It's funny that we bring this up because I actually got a string of comments from a listener, a friend of mine, Paul Kim. He was a full-time dad for 4 months. He was a stay-at-home dad. This was not working at the same time, but just being a stay-at-home dad.
Gotcha.
He said, I've learned to appreciate what stay-at-home parents do. My whole day was scheduled around naps, around his daughter's naps. It got to the point where he wanted a change of pace so badly that he would put her down for a nap and then play some video games for a while. Just to break out of the baby mindset and do something that was more just for him. And the thing was, he would choose to do that instead of take naps. He said, I would be so tired, but I wanted to do something for myself. And his takeaway was, try to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
And that's true. We brought that up before. It's really easy to lose yourself in the parenting game. And of course, who yourself is changes when you become a parent, because you're not just Jesse or Brandon or what have you anymore. You are now also dad. But you do have to take care of yourself. You do have to try and find those pockets of time that is just for you, that activity that is, that really kind of touches your soul and makes you happy in a certain way. And for Paul, that was playing Metal Gear Solid 5, which he says, by the way, is a great video game. I haven't played video games since high school because I just haven't had time, but power to you if you have the ability to do it. Enjoy the little moments, keep the bigger picture in mind, and find something for yourself to keep your sanity. All right, so that'll do it for this episode of Dadsplaining. Before we go, if you haven't already, be sure that you've given us a rating on iTunes, CastBox, or whatever platform you're currently listening to this podcast on, and write us a review if you have time. That will be key to helping us share this podcast with more dads. Brandon, if our listeners want to get in touch with us, how can they do that?
You can follow us on all major social media. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and on Instagram. If you'd really like to get in touch with us, you could drop us an email at dadsplainingpodcast@gmail.com.
Awesome. All right. So, Brandon, what are we going to talk about next week?
Next week, we're going to talk about what feeding has been like for both of us respectively. Having kids in the 10-month and 5-month range, we'll talk a little bit about that transition to solid food, what that's like, and the glories of baby food. And then we'll talk a little bit about breastfeeding and bottle feeding and what that's like.
So until next time, I'm Jesse.
And I'm Brandon.
And hey, Brandon, where do you learn to make ice cream?
Where?
Sunday school. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I am so sorry.
All right.
Thanks for listening.